Okay, so the plan on this is basically to give you guys a bit of an overhead on how to set this car up. And the reason for this is, one, because I think that it's actually a pretty easy car to set up because you don't have that many options. And two is really because it's actually probably a car we're going to use in the future. So it's worth learning because you'll learn how to drive it as well as how to set it up. Right, okay. So the first thing we're going to go with is we're going to pick a track which you know well to start off with. So that's why we're going to go for Watkins Glen on this test. We're going to go with the Cup version as well. No reason why you can't use the boot version. Boot version is absolutely fine as well. It's just I didn't want to use the boot version, that's all. And we're going to go with what used to be referred to as the default conditions. It's now not, because we now have the ability to change the time of day. As if you look here, you can go from morning, afternoon, late afternoon. Now, whilst the settings for morning and late afternoon are nice visually, they also have quite an impact upon track temperature, which is going to pretty much change how your setup works, more or less depending on the car. But pretty much is the case, we're going to go for afternoon because afternoon is what most of the race sessions run as, and it's what you're all used to running. So it gives 44°C track temp, partly cloudy or something like that in terms of skies. Well, we just have a look. If you go to adjust weather and you click use iRacing defaults, there you go, 78F, 55 humidity, 2 miles per hour wind speed, wind north, partly cloudy. Yeah. Track state, same deal. Just do clean marbles, automatically generate. And then once you've done both of those and picked a track that you know well, what I would say as well is if you're doing this is to pretty much figure out how to get to a decent setup yourself, I would strongly recommend picking a track which is regular, shall we say. And what I mean by that is that it hasn't got any real sort of specific oddities which will make it difficult if you're a first time setup sort of attempt, if you will. Like, what I would say for this kind of thing is that you want to avoid tracks such as Sebring or the Nordschleife. Nordschleife mainly because it's just way too long to really get a good handle on the setup, at least on the first attempt anyway, and it's going to take you a long time to get reference laps. And Sebring because that last corner is very specific, and if you're trying to learn the car and you're trying to learn how to make a setup, it's not really an ideal thing. So I picked Watkins because Watkins is, as far as I'm concerned, pretty easy. Another reason for using the Cup layout, and to be fair, less corners, it makes the whole thing easier. But anyway, so we're gonna go with this anyway, and we're gonna see how this works out. So just give me a second to fire up iRacing. The other thing I would say is, whilst there is a baseline setup that you can work from, which I've uploaded, what I would say is if you want to really sort of follow this along, I'm going to start from the baseline to show you how I arrived at our baseline, as it were. So first off, let's just check the weather. Yep, okay, so 45°C, 1°C away from where I thought it was, but pretty much where we were talking. Weather constant. Now you see, this is really important for when you're making a setup. You're gonna want to try your setup in lots of different conditions if you're running in a dynamic series, because it's gonna be important. But you are gonna want to do your first sort of runs and some analysis in a how do we say it? In a fixed environment, because running it in a fixed environment gives you something to work off. Now, this is especially true that we notice this on the oval sets, that if something changes, like say the wind direction changes or something like that, you can suddenly have odd behavior in certain corners and whatnot. So it's just got to work from something you know is always the same. That's also why we use the iRacing defaults and not sort of your own defaults, if you know what I mean. Like, you could set to 30C track temp all the time if you wanted to, but it would be your own specific sort of circumstances. And the other thing is that what I've noticed is default is a pretty hot setting, but it's not ridiculously hot, so you are going to want to go a bit the other side. Like we're showing 45C here, but at places like Okayama and other tracks, I've seen it go to 50C and beyond. Likewise, I've also seen the opposite. At the Nürburgring, I've seen down to 20, 25 kind of area. So at the moment, the track temperature affects the tyres way too much, but it's important to still acknowledge that that's the case and to run in different weather circumstances once you've made your setup. But at the start, you're going to want to run in default. Okay, so we're going to go to the garage screen and we're going to open the iRacing baseline. Okay, so let's have a quick look through the options here. Obviously, you got your tire pressures on this page, which we're gonna show you how to set. And then, okay, let's look at what's actually available for this car and why I've picked this car to teach you guys how to make setups. Okay, so we've got the usual sort of GT3 options in the in-car dials. You've got the brake bias, you've got ABS setting, traction control setting, engine map setting. You don't have throttle position setting, well, throttle map settings. I don't really think that's that important, so it's not really a great loss. You also do have ABS switches and traction control switches. You're fine for having a bit of fun, but realistically not going to make much difference in terms of setup. Now, in keeping with what we would run with the BMW, I'm just going to leave this as 4 on the traction control. ABS I'm going to take up to, I believe 10 is what we run on the BMW, so that's where we're going to start. Okay, let's look through some of the other options. So in terms of what you have in what I would call is base geometry kind of things, you have a tow option at the front, a tow option at the rear, both which start at positive. That's fine, I will leave those for now. What you can also see is that there's basically 0 tow to begin with. The 0.3 will probably make a difference, the 0.1, not really. You've got camber for your fronts, individual if you'd like to set it that way. No real need as far as I'm concerned, if I'm honest with you. Same goes for the rear. And we also have caster adjustment on the front. Now, the caster adjustment I'll come back to later, because it depends on how you choose to set your car up, in the sense that a lot of people don't like the steering feel to change, so they'll probably want to pick a specific caster value in their first sort of sessions and then stick with that. I can vary it around, it depends on what the track's like for me. You also have brake pad options at the front. You can, well, I say front, it applies to all 4 corners of the car. You got low, medium, high. Baseline is medium. We've used medium for a while now. I'd probably keep that there. You can also see that the front ride height starts at 82.2, rear at 90.7. It's probably okay. Let's just see how low we can get the front. Okay, so front is as low as it can go anyway. That's pretty helpful, if I'm honest with you. There's only one car I've found so far which really doesn't like being at its minimum height, and that would be the Ford GT3, but we're not going to be running that car anyway, so that's probably okay. And now this is why I wanted to use this car as our setup sort of how'd you say it, teaching program. Basically, you only have 3 sets of springs you can pick from, which makes picking a spring package pretty easy because, well, you only have 3 choices. So let's have a look at what choices you got. Okay, so set 1 is 275 at the front, 250 at the rear. Set 2 is 225 at the front and 250 at the rear. And then set 3 is 275 at the front and 225 at the rear. So let's just go back to set 1. Okay, so pretty much what we can say is that set 1 is pretty much in the middle in terms of balance, and we can say that set 3 is a softer rear relative to set 1. So immediately we can pretty much start off with saying that set 3 is going to be the most, well, forgiving is probably not quite the right word, but if all of the settings were the same and you switch between 1 and 3, you'd probably find the car maybe had a little bit more traction out of turns, but also probably understeered more. Set 2 is an interesting one because it's the only set where you have stiffer rear springs than front, so that's probably gonna keep the rear of the car propped up as you come out of the turn. Might make exit of corners a bit interesting, but it shouldn't be too bad. But I've yet to try it, so I can't really comment in that sense. I'd probably stay away from set 2 on your first attempt. Where I can foresee you wanting to maybe use set 2 is if you're gonna run a lot of rear wing. But that's, well, let's use set 1 for now because it's in the middle. Okay, so you also have bump rubber adjustment between standard and non. Not really sure why you would run anything other than standard, but I don't know, maybe someone has a reason for none. I don't know. I can't see why you'd want to do that in real life. If you made a mistake and you had too much shock travel, you would destroy your shocks because they would smash into themselves. So I would leave it at standard for now, but in terms of what that means, it means that technically the spring rate is going to be slightly non-linear as you get to max compression, because you're going to start riding on the bump spring, well, the bump rubber in this case. Okay, in terms of damping, we have pretty much 1 to 8 reasonably coarse adjustment, and that's the same across all 4 adjustments in terms of compression and high and low speed for all. Interesting to note on that is it's only between 1 and 8. That's obviously a much coarser adjustment when compared with cars such as the Audi, which have a much wider range. What that does mean is you're going to see a bigger difference presumably between each click, but it also means you have you have less options to try, which is another reason I was suggesting the use of this car. Okay, now if we look at the rear again, we've got anti-roll bar blades to pick from. We've got D1, D2, D3 and D4. Pretty much D1 is going to be the softest, D4 is going to be the stiffest. Baseline starts with D2, that's probably okay. Let's just go back to the front quickly where I was showing you before around the toe and the brake pads. You have the anti-roll bar adjustment at the front between D1, D1 and D6, D6. Baseline is D5, D4. Middle of this range is pretty much there, D4, D4 or D5, D4. Let's keep it with D5, D4 for now. Then we move back to the back again. 2 gearing options, short and standard. Baseline comes with short. I've tried at Sebring with short. Short seems okay. I would keep short unless you have reason to choose otherwise. Diff preload between 0 and 163. Baseline starts at 41. Probably again not too unreasonable of a value. Now here's the adjustment that's probably going to make the most noticeable impact on the car immediately to you. You got wing angle, which you can go from -4 all the way up through to 12. Okay, baseline starts with 5, so that's where we're gonna start. Okay, so we're gonna take it out for a couple of laps now, and let's just see where we get. Okay, so whilst your outlap is probably not really the time when you want to be sort of picking up on what the car's doing immediately, because all the tire pressures are going to be lower, the tires are going to be cooler. It's going to be pretty much when the car is at its worst, as it were, excluding the end of a long stint, in which case the tires at that point are probably going to be worse. Now what's important really to do here is to just get yourself a consistent baseline of times to know where you're working from. The other thing to note is with regards to setting wing, you're gonna be wanting to look out for what your speeds down the straights are. Okay, so we're gonna run 3 laps here, and then we're gonna come in. Normally I would run either 5 or 10, mainly to get the pressures pretty much up to where we want to be over the course of a run. They'll have stabilized after 10 laps, but I'm expediting the process for the purpose of the video. Okay, so you can tell already the car's pretty nice and stable. It's probably got a fraction too much understeer, especially around the carousel there. In all honesty, the baseline is actually a pretty good setup. It's one of the better sets I've driven in terms of from iRacing stock. Okay, one thing I noticed then on entry to the chicane, well, the bus stop, I noticed that both when I turned and applied the brakes, the car probably had a fraction more rotation than I would like. So it just makes it a little bit unnerving. So starting to push wide on the exit there. Probably a bit of an indication that we've either got a fraction too much downforce on the car at the rear, or not enough bite at the front. Relative to the rear. Okay, so I'm just going to note the speed I get up to before I hit the brakes here. Okay, so I got up to 256, but as you see, I'm probably a fraction too late on the brakes there. Not really what you want to be doing. Okay, so that's 3 laps. I'll take it through turn 1 before I park up and just take a look at the garage screen. Okay. Okay, so if we go and look at the garage screen, what can we see? Okay, well the first thing we can see is the wear is pretty small in terms of number, so it's a bit difficult for us to actually tell where we are in terms of wear. This is why it's important to do basically longer runs than what I've just done. What I would say is I like to keep the hot pressures around about between 175 and 185. So what we can see here is these are pretty much definitely too high for what I would like to be at. Because we're at 190 on the left front, 189 on the left rear. What's worthy of noting is the fact that there is a difference between the lefts and the right sides. There are 6 at the front and 3 at the rear. That's pretty much due to how Watkins is in terms of its distribution of right and left hand turns and the loading of them. For example, the carousel is a right hand turn that's very long, reasonably high speed. You've also got the first turn, which again is a right hander, which is reasonably high speed. Well, it's a medium speed turn. You've got the first part of the S's, right hander, second part of the S's coming onto the straight, right hander, and then you've got a final right hander at the end of the lap, plus the bus stop, where the first is a right and the last is a right. By contrast, you have one left hander in the S's, 2 left handers in the chicane, and then a left hander at the end of the back straight. Okay, so whilst it's worth noting that the left and right side pressures are going to be different in terms of hot, you can account for that in a pressure differential if you like. For the purpose of this, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to try and get it back down into that 175 to 185 window. So we're 10 over on the left front, so I'm going to go down to 162 on the fronts, and we're pretty much 10 over at the rear as well, so again I'm going to go down to 162. Okay, now what you can see is it's brought the front lower, so we're going to have to wrong way on the purchase there. Is that going to be enough? Nope, because I haven't clicked that one. Okay, so we're back up again, but the rear is going to have done the same, so it's important to bring that up again. The other thing I would say is I think we can get away with less wing on the car, so I'm going to take us down to 4. Realistically, what you should do is you should go out and try the tyre pressures first, and then make the wing adjustment afterwards. But again, we're already 18 minutes into this, so I thought to speed it up a fraction. The other thing to note, which I think is really important, is if you take a look up in the top right hand corner, you'll see my my FPS indicator and force feedback indicator, amongst a couple of other things, the GPU usage, CPU usage and all that. The important one to look on is the F bar. What I like to set my force feedback to is so that it's pretty much always in the green, into the yellow, like in a really highly loaded turn, but only into the red if I'm actually striking a curb or something similar. It's basically to make sure that your wheel doesn't clip and you lose some of the feeling the game is giving you. Okay, I still think we're not getting quite enough rotation through one there. But are we going faster down the straights? Let's find out. She's still got to 256. But the feel off the last turn was much better I'm not 100% convinced with the way the car is handling the curbs. Although that might be beyond the scope of this initial video. Okay, so after the first initial adjustments, it's already starting to find a bit more speed. Although admittedly some of that is probably due to me pushing the car a little bit harder than before. One thing I haven't yet mentioned is I'm pretty much going to be using just the garage screen here to create this setup. Now, I do advocate the use of Motec. I think it's a brilliant tool. I really think if you can use it and if you're willing to learn to use it, you should. Especially if you're gonna make oval setups or setups for cars which are highly aero dependent. I think you should really look into doing that, but I appreciate a lot of guys haven't got the time to learn that. And even this is probably going to take up a lot of time. But if we can just get you getting somewhere with the garage screen, that's probably going to be helpful. Okay, so I have now done 3 laps. I'm gonna pull us up on the back straight here. The other thing you guys might want to be looking at if you're going to be using endurance sets is you're going to be wanting to look at how much fuel you're using. It'll be helpful at a later date. Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick look at laps here. Okay, so our first 3 laps out, we had pretty much a 6/10 spread there, which isn't bad, but it's not great. Our best was also a 1:10.4. In our 3 that we just did, we had a 2/10 exactly spread, and we beat our personal best there by 2/10 almost. So even a couple of minor adjustments can help you get a better feel for the car. Okay, so whilst we're on this screen, I thought we just if we note the heart pressures, we're 182 lefts, 175s rights, 180s, 176s. No doubt, if you wanted to take that distribution out, you could do. That's on you, your decision. And for Watkins, I would probably say it might actually be worth it. There's a lot of tracks which are pretty balanced between left and right handers where it won't be worth it, but Watkins you might want to consider it. I know I have run split tire pressures here before, but really 182, 175, that's kind of where I want to be. What I would say is I'm doing this over 3 laps. You should really be doing this over 10 or more. I'm literally just showing you this here to show you what kind of pressures I would be looking for after 10. So don't take these as what you want to be looking for after 3. That's not what I would be doing. Right, okay. In terms of cambers, what I tend to look for is what I would do actually is look at Motec, but if we're just looking at this, what I'll look at only the middle and the inside temperatures for all the tires along with the wear. I will never ever look at the outside edges unless I'm doing an oval setup, in which case I will look at outside and middle and not inside on the lefts. But for road courses I will only ever look at inside and middle. I will never look at outside. The reason for this is I believe that the information it gives you is just massively wrong. I mean, it's really unlikely you would see a tyre that could somehow have 111, and then 95 on the outside in terms of temps. That's just crazy. What that would tell you in real life is it would tell you had way too much pressure in the middle. Well, not the middle, obviously, but in the tyre. So that's why I kind of ignore it on iRacing, because otherwise you just end up keep chasing it, and you won't actually go anywhere. So what I actually try and do is I try and match both wears and temperatures. So what we can actually see is that there's fractionally more wear on the inside edge, the right front there. It's also temperature is slightly up, and that's with 2.4 degrees of camber. Now, I think 2.4 degrees for this kind of car is actually where you want to be realistically at the front. I found that tends to actually work quite well. Same with 1.7 at the back. Anywhere I find realistically at the front, between 2.1, well 2 and 2.5 is kind of where I'm normally at. I ran pretty much the entirety of 2015 Season 3 with 2.4 degrees at the front and 1.9 at the back. So I'd be okay leaving this where they are, and that seems to work reasonably well for me. In terms of spring sets, I'm okay with how the car's handling. It's probably quite conservative, but not overly conservative. So I'm happy with how it reacts out of turns. I think it's got a lot of grip. I don't think I need more grip. Therefore, I don't want set 3, which lowers the rear springs stiffness by 25 newtons per millimeter. For you guys working in Imperial, there you go, just so you can see that. Let's go back to metric. So if we go back to set 1, 275 and 250. Now set 2 provides a stiffer rear spring, softer front. So I could try that out if I wanted a little bit more bite on the car, I suppose. But I think I'm reasonably happy with how the low speed handling is right now. I think I could probably get away with running less wing at the back though, because in the high speed it's probably giving something away in the carousel as well. So I'm gonna try going down to 2 degrees here, just to see if I can hold on to it. Notice I'm not changing anything else this time. That's because that's going to give me a big enough adjustment to look into. Depending on the results of this will depend on whether I either go looking at the wing once more or if I go and look at something else. I think I might start looking at anti-roll bars. Still see the push to the outside. I know it's the outlap, but you can still see it. Still feels like the rear's got really good traction here. A little bit of over rotation in the first part of the S's there, and again there, if you just notice, the car did start to turn a little bit too much in the middle of the left there. Finally cracking 257 on the straights too. But you can see that the car is definitely more alive now. Which I'm okay with that, but you guys might not be. We're also getting closer to the top of 5th now than we used to be down into there. car's definitely more lively. So I like that. I find it gives me more options. It gives me choices in situations. We're definitely quicker up to this point. I'm almost a tenth up by the time I brake for here. But again, the back's starting to just get a bit too interesting for me into that turn. I know we got an off track, but we are actually going faster still. We're 2 tenths up now. But you see we're now at the top of 5th. Whereas we never got near the top of 5th before, I don't think. Certainly more rear rotation for the car. I don't know if any of you guys noticed that then, but when I came out of the bus stop, the right front, you see it's not really that controlled. It was sort of controlling me rather than me controlling it. That's where I would be adjusting dampers. Okay, I believe that is once again 3 laps. So once again we're going to pull off and take a look at what we've got there. Okay, so if we look at laps, we can see again that ultimate pace has improved further again. We got down to 398 to begin with, and then got down to a 113 and then a 153. So we probably found about another tenth. Now, what I would say is, as you can probably tell, the car definitely got more lively doing that, which I was okay with, but you might not be okay with that. It's all your preference, really. You're going to be faster in a car you're more confident in, so if you can't deal with having the lower wing, go back to what you had before. Personally, I'm reasonably happy with it, so I'm gonna stick with it. I know we were near the top of 5th, but I wasn't hitting the limiter yet, so I'm gonna keep it as short. I think that worked okay. Now, with regards to any other settings, we just go quickly back to tyres. You can see again we're still in the window of where we want to be. Front is very marginally, slightly well, front inside on right is slightly harder than the middle, but that's no huge deal. And again we can see that the inside, so we may be running a fraction too much camber at the front. So if we go down to 2.2. Now the other thing that I noticed that I wasn't a huge fan of was I noticed, especially as I was turning the wheel into turn 2 and into the bus stop, there's a lot of rotation. Now I normally find that that's caused predominantly by a combination of the wing setting and the caster. I find that if I have more caster, it gives me more initial rotation into the turn, and that's okay if you need it, but it can make it nervous. So I'm going to make that camber change down to 2.2, and then I'm going to drop the caster as well down to 10.5. Now, if you look at the toe, you look at the cambers, and you look at the casters, none of them have gone to what we wanted them to go to. Now this is important. All these interlink with themselves in terms of basically how the suspension is put together. You can't alter one without altering the other inadvertently. So what you have to do is you have to go back and reset them. So if we take the camber down first, and then you see the toe is still up, so if we go back down, okay, so now we're at 0.3, which was the toe setting we had before. We're at 2.2, which is the camber we had before, and we're at 10.5, which is the caster that we wanted to change. I'm still pretty happy with rear cambers. The tyres look good. I'm fine with that. I think we should keep that as it is. Not going to make any more changes now. Just want to see those two and see how that works. So let's go out for another 3. As I said, I really am expediting this up. You really should be doing more than 3 laps to assess a change, because it might work great at the start of a run, but it might suck towards the end of a run. Still seems like it's got a bit of that feeling though. As I was coming over the hill there, you heard the revs go up a touch, and the car still shot sideways a fraction. But as I said again, outlap, so not really a great comparison. In fairness, this video isn't really going to show you a huge deal in terms of the difference in how the car handles, and that's actually pretty much due to the baseline being actually as good as it is. If the baseline was worse, that would actually get the point across more. But that's a good thing, because at least it means you can go back to something that you know. You're really washed out in that turn then. Not really happy with how it went through there. So I've not yet figured out where the optimal shift point is. So basically I'm shifting when the red band comes up on the dash. Still washing out in this turn. Washing out even more so now because of the camber change. Because we've got less bite from the fronts. We've pretty much sacrificed a bit of performance from that end of the car for some tyre longevity. Felt quite nice out of the last turn there though. Okay, so what I would say is that the first 2 laps have actually not been so great, but now the car's coming to me on the 3rd lap. Still unhappy with the over rotation on the brakes. As you probably see there, it's making it a bit inconsistent for me. I had to take 2 bites at the right. You can also see as the back's starting to slide a bit now. I'm probably leveraging the rears a bit more than I should be. Okay, and that's our 3 laps, so we're going to pull up on the back straight again. Now, I think the reason why the sliding was becoming noticeable is because I was trying to use the rear of the car to turn the front more because we'd lost that bite at the front. Right, okay, so if we go back, we can see we're 98, 98, 98, 98, 98, 98. Rear temps haven't actually changed. Front temps, right sides, well, I say right side, left side as well, both fractionally lower and closer to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to keep that change, but I'm not going to head any further in that direction because I don't think it's going to give me what I'm after. Now, in order to fix the unnervy braking, I'm going to do something that's pretty obvious. I'm just going to move the brake bias forward two clicks because we'll be able to see the difference more. Now, what I'm also going to do is, in order to give me a bit more bite into the carousel, I'm gonna go down one anti-roll bar adjustment and see how that helps me out. Now, notice I only changed the front bar. The reason I changed the front bar rather than the rear is twofold. Firstly, it's the front of the car that I'm having the problem with, so I want to work on that end to fix the problem. Secondly, there's finer adjustment at the front than there is the rear. I don't think it's that big of a problem that I'm having. I think it's sort of fine tuning. It's not sort of huge deal, so I'm not going to take a big swing at it. I'd rather take a small step and see. And besides, I can always go more if I want to. Now, notice I have not touched diff preload yet at all. Now, the reason I've not touched diff preload is because it's not causing me any problems as such. I'm not having really big issues when getting back on the throttle. I'm not finding the car's really trying to spin when I'm getting on the gas. I'm also not finding that it's too tight when I'm lifting off, or that it's got a lot of snap between the two conditions, if you know what I mean. For example, you can sort of tell this in a car where if you're halfway through the turn and you're understeering wildly, but then you get back on the gas and all of a sudden the front bites in and drives you round, then that's kind of when I'd start to look at a diff preload, because if you reduce the preload, what you'll do is you'll make it so that the car isn't pushing as wide in the corner, but then it's also going to be more forgiving when you get back on the throttle. So I'm going to keep it as 41 because it seems to be working okay. Again, I'm not going to change anything else. I've made the bar adjustment, made the brake pressure bias adjustment. That's what I'm going to leave it as. Okay, so we're going to go back out and do another 3. One thing I didn't mention was that the lap times haven't really changed much. Now that's because mainly what I was going for on that last run was a bit more tyre longevity rather than speed. So it's actually good that we haven't seen a time drop off, but we might have got a bit more out of the tyres. some of you might be thinking why I didn't make the brake bias adjustment in the car as I was driving around. The reason for that is I just wanted to show you that I was actually making the adjustment. So you've still got that kind of pivot when I lift off the brakes. Still pushing a fraction wide though on the exit of that turn. Braking performance is a fraction better, but you notice I wasn't pushing as wide out of the carousel. And the reason for that is due to the reduction in stiffness on the front anti-roll bar means that the front now has a bit more bite back. So we lost the bite by reducing the camber, but we've got it back a bit by reducing the stiffness of the bar. And as you can see, the speeds come back as well. A lot of this is really a confidence thing. And if you have the confidence to attack the bus stop more here, you're going to gain a lot of time. So it's worth keeping that in mind. There's no point you trying a setup where you've got the wing all the way at minimum because you think you're going to be a rocket down the straights. Because if you can't hold on to your car in the turns and you're inconsistent in terms of your laps, it's not worth you doing. Still pushing a little bit wide. Still not quite got what I would like at the front there. Okay, we pushed a fraction wide there in the second part of the bus stop, and we're pushing wide still here on the exit. So it either speaks of one of two things: either I'm trying to drive the car in too hard, which is entirely possible, or we're still pushing on exit. It's actually been a pretty scruffy lap in all honesty. Probably not really worth comparing too well against, because obviously I got down to the 10-0 and then was back up to the 10-2. So you get a bit loose on the exit there. But it's our lap to park anyway. Okay, so if we go back to the garage, we can see. Right, now this is interesting to note. You know, we've got 104 degrees on the front and 107 on the rear. 111, well, 112 and 112 again on those. Now, I know I said don't use the outside temp, but noting that it's significantly higher on that rear than the front is telling us one thing really. It's telling us that we're we're now starting to use the rears more than the fronts. In probably mostly on exit, because we're still pushing in the middle of the corner. So what we can say is that we need to be mindful of that, because the longer you go into the run, the more you might be doing that, and you're going to start to end up with a looser car. Okay, so I liked where that adjustment was heading, and I liked what I felt was better performance on the brakes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to a D4, D3 bar at the front. And I know I just talked about diff preload, but I'm also going to reduce the diff preload down to 27. Now, actually no. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep the front bar the same, and we're going to make that diff preload adjustment. Now, hopefully, what this is going to mean is this should loosen the car up a bit in the carousel. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep a tighter line. So let's give that a go. I appreciate that this is turning into quite a long video now, so we'll do only a few more things before we call time on it. But I will produce a part 2, which will focus probably almost solely on damper tuning. But the real sort of the groundwork of the setup is done in this video. Okay, so looking at the lap time, we're pretty much matching ourselves coming up over the top here, where we're basically 0 on the meter. I ran the car a fraction too wide there. That was my fault rather than the car. It's still quite tight on the exit of corners. In fact, probably even more so now that we've reduced the diff preload. It's extremely wide there. But as you noted, I didn't actually pick up 1x from doing that. So, it's fair game in my book. Okay, we're able to hug a much tighter line there. If you notice, we were able to hold the inside much better. And consequently, we're nearing the top of the gear faster. And suitably, we're rewarded with our first sub 1 minute 10 lap time, which I was too busy looking at, and that's why I just run wide. I'm still going to run this lap because it's important to run the same number of laps each time to check the wear, the temperatures, that kind of thing. But in terms of time, this lap is basically meaningless because of how big of a mistake I made in turn 1. Yeah, as I said, it was certainly not a representative lap by any means. And as usual, we're going to pull up on the back here. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at laps to see where we've got from. So obviously with the baseline we were 110.8, 110.4, with 110.4 being our best. We're now down to 109.8, but as you can see the rate of improvement has slowed dramatically. Now you will find this, that you pretty much get to a point where you start to level out. Now that's both good and that's bad. It's bad because it means that you're kind of at your limit as to what you can do. So if you start seeing guys who are still significantly faster than you, there's either one of two things. Being brutally honest, it's normally the first one in the sense that they're just faster than you. But it can also be the second one in that you've gone the wrong direction. What I mean by that is, say for example, when I moved the wing down from 5 to 2, I preferred how it drove and I went faster, but that might not have actually been the right thing to do. That might have given me an instant gain, but it might have been more beneficial to build a setup around wing 5. To check this, what you should be doing is you should be looking at other people in your session, particularly the guys who are faster than you, and you should be looking at where they're faster than you. Pick a good way of looking at this is to look at what their max speed is on the straight, see if it's the same as yours. Look at what their max speed in the middle of a turn is, for example. Like, a good place to look here would be the carousel, because if you look in the carousel and hey, you're doing, I don't know, 200 kilometers an hour, there's a guy there doing 215 kilometers an hour. It's quite a big difference. I would hope it wouldn't be that much, but you could pretty much safely say if you looked and he'd taken a similar line to you, braked a similar point to you, but then he was able to get on the gas earlier than you and was able to carry more speed through the corner and more speed off, you could quite easily say that he probably was running more wing than you. So you should be mindful of that. Don't pen yourself into going one direction. It might not work out immediately. I mean, I spent an hour and 1 minute in the session here, and not an hour and 1 minute been on the track. I've only actually done 23 laps. But anyway, let's get back to looking at it for that reason. Okay, so again we can see that probably wearing the left front out slightly faster, 1% more. For what I do, which is a lot of endurance racing, that's a good thing. I like to wear my fronts out faster than do the rears, because that means that the car then tends to just understeer a bit more. You lose a bit of speed, but that's very much preferential to going backwards into a barrier. So it's worth keeping that in mind. Now, I was happy with that diff preload adjustment, but I don't think I want to go any more on that, because that's going to contribute even more to the loose on entry, not issue, but characteristic. Now, realistically, I think I've actually been through all the adjustments there. The ones I haven't changed are toe. Now the reason I haven't changed toe is because I haven't felt that I needed to change toe. But to give you some idea, rear toe, never ever set the rear toe to anything other than a positive value. Now actually, for a bit of a joke, I'll give you an idea. Right, okay, let's put the rear toe at minus 0.9 and I'll go out and do a lap. Now I will actually be trying to complete the lap, so I'm not making this look any worse than it is. That wiggle out of the pits there is genuinely how it drives. And again, it's already trying to turn me here. Suspect it's going to get real loose up around about the chicane. Pretty much what you're doing here is you're pointing the leading edges of the tyres outwards, which is leading to an unstable scenario at the back of the car. Which is why it feels weird because it feels like the back's trying to steer itself, and two, it basically makes it so the car is as it said, it is unstable. If I'm honest with you, it isn't actually as bad as I was thinking it was going to be, but I think I've demonstrated the point well enough there, and also in the bus stop. Basically, you want to avoid it. It's not a good idea to do it. There's only one car I know of where you can actually get away with a fraction amount of negative rear toe, and that's the Kia. But we're not driving a Kia, so keep it at positive values. But pretty much, if you're encountering the kind of behaviour I've just demonstrated to you there, give it an extra click that way to the right so that you're getting more toe. That'll stable you up. I could actually do that to give me more braking stability. It might be worthwhile. Now, front of the car, you see baseline had 0.3. I was pretty happy with that, so I didn't feel the need to change it. But if I start going to negative toe, what I'll find is the front end will become much more pointy. It'll want to turn into the turns a lot more aggressively. So I'll just demonstrate that to you by, I've got a 2.1. I normally wouldn't use 2.1. I'd probably stop at about 1.6. Because the other thing you want to know about toe is that if you're pointing the two tyres towards each other, it means that they're both trying to turn. Now, if they're trying to turn, then they're dragging along the ground, not in the direction that you necessarily want to go on straights, so you're slowing your straight line speed. And what you'll also be doing is you'll also be generating more heat in the tyres and you'll be wearing them out faster. So I tend to use as little a toe as I can get away with. It's actually made the car kind of nice through the bus stop there. It's quite lively, had quite good bite. It's not undesirable to run negative toe at the front. It's actually quite helpful. Just don't go crazy with it, and you should be all good. Like there, if you look at it, I see that he was a little bit better in terms of turning in to that final turn. I'll actually run a lap here and see what I get. It's actually really good through there. Really liked it through that first turn. But one thing I am noticing as I am now going slower down the straight, or at least my delta bar was telling me I was losing time, and that was my bad. I didn't really demonstrate the effects of the toe out there too well. I mean, having a big sideways moment sort of describes it a little bit, I guess, because the front is sort of too responsive. But that was mainly, if you notice, it was when I went over the curb, and that's onto a damper setting. But we'll leave that until the following time. Now I want to show just one last thing. I'm just going to show you the effects of the different springs. Okay, so we had 275 and 250 is what we've been building around. Now let's go. If we go, yeah, let's go to set 2 first, because that puts a 225 and a 250 in the car. I just need to go back quickly to see what the ride heights were. Okay, so you can see I have to bring the fronts up a fraction. The rear's down a slight touch. But pretty much what we're going to have now is, because we've got a softer front, the front's going to travel more on entry to the corner. And what we're also going to see is the back is it's gonna deflect less as well, especially on exit. So I'm expecting that we're actually going to probably have fraction more oversteer here. As you're thinking about it, I just said that the front will travel more, and the front spring hasn't actually changed. I don't believe. I think it's still a 225. No, it has. Sorry, because we went to spring set 2, not spring set 3. Because 225 is previously what we had on the rear. I do find it rather odd how we only have 3 sets of springs for this car, but it does. It prevents you from spending a lot of time messing around with spring combinations. So I'm not entirely against it. I actually kind of liked it through there. It was, again, pretty good. See, normally I wouldn't advocate changing springs so late on in a setup, but because there's actually not that much going on in this car, you could actually change them and see what happens. It's actually pretty good with you, if I'm honest. Rather enjoying it. I'm actually going quicker up to this point in the lap. Still a bit of push on the exit there, which is actually ruined the lap there. So you can see how the anti-roll bar is still sort of propping the front up, as it were, still giving us a similar balance in the turns, despite the fact that we've actually changed the springs, the main springs, and that's because the main springs work in conjunction with the anti-roll bars. The anti-roll bars effectively add extra roll stiffness to the car. They're not the only supplier of roll stiffness. Pushed wide again, so probably could actually go for a lower front anti-roll bar, but we get away with it now. Thought that since I'd done 2 laps I might as well do a third. That way then we can look at the temperatures and the wear rates at the end and see if anything's changed significantly. Now I am aware that there's probably going to be a couple of people who are going to comment up and say, well, I haven't taken the exact same lines through all the turns, I haven't maintained the exact same way I drive round, and so on and so on. And yeah, that's true. You do want to be going as much the same lines as you can manage when you're making a setup. But I am also trying to sort of find the line as I go. So yes, I am aware of that, and yes, you should be trying to best copy the same line over and over. Okay, I'm going to pull up on the back straight again here. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at laps then. Okay, so our best run had that 109.889. We had a 110.1 and a 110.6. We removed that 110.6 and say that I probably would have managed another 110.1 had I been able to keep it up. If we look, yeah, the ultimate pace in the last run wasn't quite as good, but we were still within a tenth, and we managed a faster other lap, and again we were 110.0. So if we then compare that to the previous run where we were 110.0, 110.2, 110.2, I'm pretty happy with actually that. I'm rather surprised that spring change worked as well as it did, but I'm happy that it did, and now we're going to have a look at the effects that had. Now actually the answer is really not that much. It's actually quite a subtle difference, and if you notice that the rear is 112, the front's 111, but what you can also see is that we've no longer got those 97% on the left fronts anymore. They're back to 98, and that's because we're turning off the rear of the car even more than we were, because we've got more stiffness in the back, which is why we're not ploughing so much in the longer corners, where I was able to hold tighter lines through the carousel. And specifically off the last corner, I think the car was better. We weren't relying on that left front so much. So actually, I think this was pretty good. The 225 fronts and the 250 rears. Now, I was hypothesizing that maybe if you were running a higher wing setting with spring set 2, that would probably work better. So now if we just take a quick look back at set 1. Set 1 was 275, 250. So set 2 we were 225, 250. So we didn't actually change the rear springs at all. My mistake on that. We just changed the fronts. But now if we look at set 3, that's set 1 but with a 225 rear spring. So let's just give that a quick go. Let's get those ride heights back to where they were. It's important to maintain consistency. That's probably one fraction just a little higher at the rear than it was. You can't get it quite dead on, but that'll be good enough anyway for what we're trying to do here. Okay, now what I'm expecting is this thing to really push, because the rear is going to have a lot of grip. The one thing I would say that I noticed, especially with that spring set 2, was I think the stock damper settings were actually better matched to those springs than the first set, the set 1 springs, because it seemed to handle the bust up much better, and I hadn't made any damper adjustments at all. Yeah, if you notice, you can see it already on the outlap that softer rear spring and that stiffer front has really has really started to push the front out of the turn, and that's because the front's just got less grip relative to the rear in this scenario. I mean, it's really stable. It's not bad to drive at all, but I think it's going to be losing time. I actually got a really good line through there then. But you see we're pushing a lot wider through there. It's actually going to be a reasonably good time. That was really my bad then. I was much further over that curb than I've even been close to. Once again, I'll run the 3 laps, so you're welcome to skip forward to where I'm looking at the garage screen. It is interesting to note that there isn't actually that much pace differential between these 3 spring sets. So it appears to be more a case of driver preference. Bear in mind that I am still learning this car pretty much as I'm trying to explain it, so do consider that it has only been out for a week. Ah, that's gonna screw with my data. Ah. Okay, well, I'm not gonna get to show you that. I mean, as you can see, it's pretty much showing that the rears are harder, and that's because it's just come out of having that huge moment. But it's not valid comparison anyway, because it wasn't done on the same lap. So, I'm just gonna go back to set 2 here. Now I also haven't touched on the effects that you can have with ride height. It's worth noting that you can further tune the balance of the car with this. I tend to always like to put the front pretty much as low as iRacing will let me get it, and then I'll adjust the rear accordingly. What you'll find is that if you lower the rear, you're probably going to tighten the car up. If you raise the rear, you're probably going to loosen the car up. I found that seems to make more of a difference on the corner entry than it necessarily does on the exit. And it tends to make more of a difference on more aero dependent cars than non-aero dependent cars. But that said, the remark about the front ride height is the same for basically any car. The only one car I found it doesn't work for is the Ford GT3, but I'll run pretty much everything else as low as I can get it, and that includes the Daytona prototype, the Ford Mustang, the BMW Z4 I'll also run on the ground, the Audi I think I had on the ground. This is pretty much on the ground. NASCAR's definitely. Yeah. You probably tell me that there's a car that you don't. That's fine, but that's how I work. That actually probably covers it for this one. What I'll do is I'll save this setup, and then I'll come back to it with a bit of a talk on dampers. I'll also do a little bit of investigation into the spring perch offset as well, but you guys can look at that pretty easily. It doesn't take a lot. What I would say is if you want to find out the difference and you want to do some quick tests, start with the numbers I have here. Take it so that the front ride height's the same. Bring the rear up to 95, 100, 105. Do it in 5 increments and see how it feels. Okay. Well, I think that's pretty much it. I'm done. If you guys have made it to the end, thanks for actually watching, and hopefully it's helped you out.